Well, welcome everyone. Great to see you all back on this lovely evening. I am not in my usual space, although I feel like I'm getting pretty, it feels pretty normal to say that. We are currently moving houses, and so I am in a brand new home this evening and away from my office and the rest, but getting set up here. So you may hear a little bit of an echo just because we still haven't gotten all the furniture in and all the rest. But as always, let me know where you're tuning in from. It's so great to have you all with us. I'm grateful for your consistent presence each and every one of these weeks, even if you're watching after the fact and the rest. It's always great to be with you, to be able to spend time with you. And just make sure that everybody can hear me and the rest. Let me know that you can hear me. That would be fantastic. And I hope you are doing well. It has been a long week. Last week, I was supposed to go live with this very lesson and the rest, and was able to do that because the recording I left behind when I was on my way to Nashville for the Lads to Leaders event, which went just fantastic. Over 10,000 people participated there in Lads to Leaders there in Nashville convention site at the Opryland. Just a wonderful experience. I am still feeling the exhaustion from that, and then add on this week. This week has been an incredibly heavy week, just moving houses here in town. And anytime you have a move and you could add in a day of rain, sleet, and hail, followed then by a day of tornadoes, followed then by a Wednesday morning with some snow showers, and then today we had sleet and a little bit of snow. It's the spring in the Midwest, and so right now I think it's sunny and 55. It's just been kind of crazy and kind of nuts, but it's one of those things that just kind of happens. You just kind of deal with it. So I think after getting past this week, it's going to feel a lot better, being a little bit more settled along the way and the rest. But without further ado, I'm so sorry I missed last week, but I'm so grateful for you all. Let's dive in. We've got three fantastic letters to look at this evening, and we are nearing the end of this book, the end of this semester in time together. But as always, if you're watching live later on, if you're watching at a later date and the rest, also grateful for you. But for those of you who've just stuck through this every Thursday night, man, I'm so grateful. Grateful for your presence and the rest. And for the rest of you, grateful for you tuning in after the fact. So, letter 24. Here we go. There are 31 letters, so we're almost there. Letter 24. My dear Wormwood, I have been in correspondence with Slum Trimpet, who is in charge of your patient's young woman, and begin to see the chink in her armor. It is an unobtrusive little vice which she shares with nearly all women who have grown up in an intelligent circle united by a clearly defined belief. And it consists in a quite untroubled assumption that the outsiders who do not share this belief are really too stupid and ridiculous. It is not, in fact, very different from the conviction she would have felt at the age of 10 that the kind of fish knives used in her father's house were the proper or normal or real kind, while those of the neighboring families were not real fish knives at all. And so you kind of have to understand the premise of what he's kind of hitting at here when it comes to this concept of fish knives. It's basically that you have a real knife that's used in your home, and that's the real thing. And what other people are using is not really the real thing. And so I don't think we really have fish knives in our day. That they would be fairly common in what we use and the rest. But maybe if you grew up in a place where you have a specific, like a salad fork and the rest, well, that's a salad fork. Yeah, but you go to somebody else's house, that's not a real salad fork because it doesn't look like my salad fork. So obviously that's different. So that little bit in the mind is what he's playing at, is mine's the real version versus what everybody else is currently doing. Now, the element of ignorance, naivety in all of this is so large, and the element of spiritual pride so small that it gives us little hope of the girl herself. So in essence, he's saying this girl that this patient has fallen in love with and the rest is not really conducive to this type of behavior that he's wanting to kind of hint at, but maybe he might. But have you thought of how it can be made to influence your own patient? It is always the novice who exaggerates. It's the ones who are the most gung-ho, ready to go because they're new at something, ready to dive in, and the rest. The man who has risen in society is over-refined. The young scholar is pedantic. If in this new circle your patient is a novice, he is there daily meeting Christian life of a quality he never before imagined and seeing it all through an enchanted glass because he is in love. He is anxious, indeed the enemy commands him, to imitate this quality, to desire to be like those around him? Can you get him to imitate this defect in his mistress and to exaggerate it until what was venial in her becomes in him the strongest and most beautiful of the vices? Spiritual pride. So can you take what is in her where she might look at others and go, yeah, we're different, but it's not a huge deal. Where instead with him, he might go, we're different. And actually, that's a big deal. That's a good thing. And create a spiritual pride because I'm better than them in some form or fashion. The condition seems ideally favorable. The new circle in which he finds himself is one of which he is tempted to be proud for many reasons other than its Christianity. It is better educated, more intelligent, more agreeable society than any he has yet encountered. And so there's kind of a standing even in society in some of these situations where you feel like, oh, I've kind of arrived. I've got a good group of people around me. These are more educated. They're better in that sense. He is also under some degree of illusion as to his own place in it. Under the influence of love, he may still think himself unworthy of the girl, but he is rapidly ceasing to think himself unworthy of others. He has no notion how much in him is forgiven because they are charitable and made the best of because he is now one of the family. So we often don't realize how often people might overlook our own faults and our own failures and the rest because we just kind of assume that they're fine and they obviously I'm good, and so they're not really forgiving of me. I belong here, and so I'm doing everything right all the time. He does not dream how much of his conversation, how much of his opinions are recognized by them all as mere echoes of their own. Still less does he suspect how much of the delight he takes in these people and due to the erotic enchantment which the girl for him spreads over all her surroundings. So he's so infatuated with this girl that everything about her and her friends and those around him that are Christians, like he is just kind of regurgitating over and over again all the things that they are. He doesn't even realize how much he's being influenced. He thinks that he likes their talk and way of life because of some congruity between their spiritual state and his, when in fact they are so far beyond him that if he were not in love, he would be merely puzzled and repelled by much which he now accepts. In fact, it seems like everything around him is just different, and he's just trying to, I totally belong here because I belong with her, and so forth. And so that's kind of where this balance finds itself out. He is like a dog which should imagine it understood firearms because its hunting instinct and loves for its master enables it to enjoy a day's shooting. So he's making an absurd analogy here. It's like a dog should imagine, I understand guns, in essence, because of hunting, because I love hunting, even though I don't actually understand how to fire it or do any of those things. Here is your chance, is what Screwtape's going to say. While the enemy, by means of sexual love and of some very agreeable people far advanced in his service, is drawing the young barbarian up to levels he could never otherwise have reached, you must make him feel that he is finding his own level, that these people are his sort, and that coming among them, he has come home. So in essence, that he has found something that he belongs to. It's not something that God is calling him to, but in some ways he's creating his own pride that he has been the one who has done it. When he turns from them to other society, he will find it dull, partly because almost any society within his reach is, in fact, much less entertaining, but still more because he will miss the enchantment of the young woman. You must teach him to mistake this contrast between the circle that delights and the circle that bores him for the contrast between Christians and unbelievers. He must be made to feel, he'd better not put it into words, how different we Christians are. And by we Christians, he must really be unknowingly mean my set. And by my set, he must mean not the people who in their charity and humility have accepted me, but the people with whom I associate by right. I belong there. They are mine. I take ownership of them and the rest. Everything else is just nonsense and the rest. So there's a drawing, a cut, a line that's being set in essence, and he's separating himself and seeing others as other instead, and seeing himself as on his own, as opposed to seeing himself really as being drawn by God, uplifted by God. He's seeing himself as I belong here by right. Success here depends on confusing him. If you try to make him explicitly and professedly proud of being a Christian, you will probably fail. The enemy's warnings are too well known. If, on the other hand, you let the idea of we Christians drop altogether and merely make him complacent about his set, you will produce not true spiritual pride, but mere social vanity, which, by comparison, is a trumpery, puny little sin. And can I be honest with you? There's a lot of this that comes out at times where people will say, will say things like, "Well, I'm proud of my church and the rest and what we're doing," and there's like a competitive nature at times with individuals when it comes to, "Well, our church is better than your church," and so forth. And I see a lot of this, and it seems so insignificant even at the time, and this feels like, in essence, somewhat what he's getting at here. What you want is to keep a sly self congratulation mixing with all his thoughts and never allow him to raise the question, what precisely am I congratulating myself about? The idea of belonging to an inner ring, of being in a secret, is very sweet to him. Play on that nerve. We found it. We're the only ones. We've got it all together. We know everything instantly. Now, I understand, and I want to say this, be very clear about this. I am, without a doubt, um, I would not be where I'm as in the church, where I am, where I worship, what I do, all the things that I do, if I did not believe with my whole heart that I was at the church that is of Christ, the church that is God's. I would not be there if that was not the case. In the same light, I have found through the years that people who will often say, well, it doesn't matter where you go to church. And this is kind of the opposite perspective. Doesn't matter where you go to church. If you go to church over here, church over there, and I always laugh at that in some capacity, because basically I tell people, if you basically say it doesn't matter where you go to church, you're saying your church doesn't matter. And so there's an aspect where we have to say, I am seeking truth. I am seeking the one true church. I am seeking the church that Christ died for, that Christ built, and so forth. At the other side of this, though, we have to be careful of spiritual sin, which is where we specifically congratulate ourselves, which is what he's hinting at here, of having arrived, having got it, how we're done, we're finished. And that is the damage that can happen, where we see ourselves as the ultimate, as if there was no one else. Now, I'm not saying necessarily that there are other churches. I'm not saying that. Other churches where one can find God and so forth, and find salvation and the rest. There is but one we are saved through, and that is Jesus the Christ. There's but one way to heaven, and that is through Jesus the Christ. And it is through his bride, the church. What I often find confusing at times is I heard this said the other it was a couple of months ago, where I had an individual who wrote on Facebook and the rest, and specifically he said, there are no people who, and his specific word, there are no people who worship in buildings that do not have the words Church of Christ on them that are going to be in heaven. And I remember instantly bristling, and I went, whoa, because number one, this has to do with the building, and it has to do with the name specifically on the door of the building. And I sat there thinking about all the house churches that I worked with in China. I thought about all the different groups that I worked with in different places that were specifically house churches or underground churches. They don't have buildings, they don't have doors, they don't have a name on the door and the rest. And you might say, well, that's semantics in some way. And I would say, yes, because what matters is what's being practiced on the inside. What matters is what they actually believe and what they teach and what they preach and what they do when it comes to observing their faith in God. That's what matters. I would argue the name on the door matters very little, because there are at times, even within our own fellowship, very largely speaking, who use the name Churches of Christ that do not practice what I believe to be within Scripture. And so there is a balance at play here, and part of that is pride. And there are many out there who their entire pride of life seems to be in the name itself, Church of Christ, as opposed to the practices, the adherence of what it means to be a biblical Christian, a disciple of Christ, one who follows and seeks God in all things. And we have to be careful with that. Teach him, using the influence of this girl, when she is silliest, to adopt an air of amusement at the things that unbelievers say. Some theories which he may meet in modern Christian circles may here prove helpful. Theories, I mean, that place the hope of society in some inner ring of clerks, some trained minority of theocrats. We've got it all figured out. We have this. And boy, and I have to say this, I know this, when it comes to preachers, preacher schools, theological gatherings, conventions, all those types of stuff. And I attend a ton of them at different places. And there are some at times who believe they have the answers for all things. They just do. And it always fascinates me how they operate in those ways. And there's few groups out there that I know who actively spend most of their time figuring out who's not part of them than actually teaching the gospel. Spend more time, I call them the brotherhood police. Spend a lot of time out there just trying to constantly figure out who is no longer a Christian and make sure everybody knows about it. based off of their standard and the rest, as opposed to actually teaching the gospel of Jesus Christ, the fullness of it. It is no affair of yours whether those theories are true or false. The great thing is to make Christianity a mystery religion in which he feels himself one of the initiates. They've got it all right, and so that's what you want. Pray do not fill your letters with rubbish about this European war. Here he kind of switches a little bit and says, its final issue is no doubt important, but that is a matter for the high command. He says, stop worrying about the war. That's not the point here. I am not in the least interested in knowing how many people in England have been killed by bombs. In what state of mind they died, I can learn from the office at the end. That they were going to die sometime, I already knew. This is what I love, this line here, just as a reminder to us all. All of us will die, or the Lord will return. And with that in mind, the one thing we must prepare for is that. And this little note that, like, why would I care when they died, how they died? What I care about is in what state of mind they died, and the fact that they were going to die was already foreknown. So that demon doesn't care about that at all. Please keep your mind on your work, your affectionate uncle, Screwtape. Letter 25. My dear Wormwood, the real trouble about the set your patient is living in is that it is merely Christian. They all have individual interests, of course, but the bond remains mere Christianity. Now, this is a fascinating note because if you've ever read Mere Christianity, I think this is kind of what he's hinting at in the rest. His entire book, and I highly recommend it. Mere Christianity is a fantastic book to study through. You could actually go back and watch a bunch of videos that I did last year on Mere Christianity as we studied through it. So if those of you went through that with me, you'll know this already. So he's hinting at this very notion here. What we want, if men become Christians at all, is to keep them in the state of mind I call Christianity and. Now, this is going to be very important. You know, Christianity in the crisis, Christianity in the new psychology, Christianity in the new order, Christianity in faith healing, Christianity in physical, cyclical research, Christianity in vegetarianism, Christianity in spelling reform. If they must be Christians, let them at least be Christians with a difference. Substitute for the faith itself some fashion with the Christian coloring. Work on their horror of the same old thing. Now, let me note this right now. This is kind of one of those things that I've seen. If you look, this comes and goes over time. So more recently, you would have Christianity in social justice, Christianity in race relations, Christianity in let's see, and if you go back a little while, you would have Christianity and climate change. You have all of these things that kind of then play themselves out in our current culture in and of themselves. Now, you would note that in and of themselves, these things are not inherently evil. But what he is actually hinting at here is the distraction where it becomes more important that and other things becomes the very gospel that they preach. In fact, is what I preached and taught for quite a while, all the way through 2020, 2021, 2022, as I was studying through critical race theory and intersectionality. And for those of you who don't know, I did my master's through all of that during that specific time frame when all of it was happening really in a very massive way in our culture. And it elevated itself to a point where almost every sermon and every discussion and everything was on race relations, racial reconciliation, all those things. And believe me, there is a time and place. Those are absolutely issues that must be dealt with in some form or format. But what many of them did, and what I believe Satan utilized during that time, was distract the church from her ultimate purpose, where the goal in and of itself became that. Was racial reconciliation was more important than spiritual reconciliation. That it was more important for us to talk about white fragility and white problems and so forth, and even then tie it in within the national discussion on politics and the rest, where churches became more insightful when it came to political and cultural aspects than the actual teaching of the gospel. And yes, there's absolutely a balance, and there's a time and a place. But don't miss the fact that we are easily distracted. In fact, that's what he's getting on. Work on the horror of the same old thing. Work on the horror of the same old thing. And why does he say that? The horror of the same old thing is one of the most valuable passions we have produced in the human heart. An endless source of heresies in religion, folly in counsel, infidelity in marriage, and inconsistency in friendships. The humans live in time and experience reality successively. And so here he's getting to this point where he's actually talking about where we're fascinated with the new. We have to have the newest idea, newest thing, the newest book. And I speak to you as someone who reads a lot. I love a good book and the rest, but I will tell you, I have in the last probably 5-10 years, I've been forced to read through graduate school and the rest a lot of new books. And candidly, if I were just I would not say that in the last few years has been a great years for writing. In fact, I would actually note just from a truth perspective, I find a lot of the postmodernist writers, postmodernist theologians and writers out there to actually not have been necessarily a waste of time, but I think they have done honestly more harm than good. I look back in the history, I look at back books at like this one that we're going through right now and others, and I find far more value in a lot of the historical things that have survived time, that books that have survived truth, that have made their way through time over and over again. The reason why they're still considered classics or good and the rest is not because they're just old, it's because of the pervasive truths that tend to come out of them. That's the reason they survive. That's the reason why they're still loved. And he's hinting at something here. To experience much of it, therefore, they must experience many different things. In other words, they must experience change. So now he's getting into the human psyche of us in general about how we experience time successively, the reality from point A to point B. And with that being in mind, that change is something that we have to deal with. In fact, he's going to get to this. And since they need change, the enemy, being a hedonist at heart, he always loves to throw that in about God, has made change pleasurable to them, just as he has made eating pleasurable. But since he does not wish them to make change any more than eating an end of itself, that the change or the thing or the issue, the end of itself, he has balanced the love of change in them by a love of permanence. He has contrived to gratify both tastes together in the very world he has made, by that union of change and permanence which we call rhythm. Now I love this little part here. He gives them the seasons, each season different, yet every year the same, so that spring is always felt as a novelty, yet always as the recurrence of an immemorial theme. He gives them in his church a spiritual year. They change from a fast to a feast, but it is the same feast as before. The repetitive nature of nature itself, the repetitive nature of faith, and I think of every year as it's always what's next. Like right now, just in my calendar, I'm looking at this, the end of the semester. Then we head into the summer, and I've got camp, and then I've got some things coming up where I'm speaking at some different events. I've got a couple of different things that come up. Then it's prepping for the fall semester, and it's a new study, and it's a Monday night and a Tuesday night and the rest. And I love the repetitive nature of those things. Now, just as we pick out and exaggerate the pleasure of eating to produce gluttony, so we pick out this natural pleasantness of change and twist it into a demand for absolute novelty. Think of in the book of Acts and the rest, where you see the Athenians were known for sitting around all day long and doing nothing but talking about something that was new. And then they twist it into a demand for absolute novelty. This demand is entirely our workmanship. If we neglect our duty, men will not be only contented, but transported by the mixed novelty and familiarity of snowdrops this January, sunrise this morning, plum puddings this Christmas. Children, until we have taught them better, will be perfectly happy with a seasonal round of games in which conquerors succeed hopscotch as regularly as autumn follows summer. Only by our incessant efforts is the demand for infinite or unrhythmical change kept up. Oh man, and so in fact, how often do you think people are just like, well, I just want something new, or I need something new? And this is where he's hinting at, this is where they've really gotten into people when it comes to wanting a new wife, a new spouse, new intimacy, new whatever, a new game, a new what, all this concept of new. I just need something new over and over and over again, instead of learning to be content, but also with the rhythm that there is something new that is always coming, and there's a balance. This demand is valuable in various ways. In the first place, it diminishes pleasure while increasing desire. The pleasure of novelty is by its very nature more subject than any other to the law of diminishing returns. And continued novelty costs money, so that the desire for it spells avarice or unhappiness or both. And again, the more rapacious the desire, the sooner it must eat up all the innocent sources of pleasure and pass it on to those the enemy forbids. Thus, by inflaming the horror of the same old thing, We have recently made the arts, for example, less dangerous to us than perhaps they may have ever been. Lowbrow and highbrow artists alike being now daily drawn into fresh and still fresh excesses of lasciviousness, unreason, cruelty, and pride. And let me just put it this way: in the arts, modern art is a fantastic example of this. When you turn around, and I remember seeing a guy who duct taped a banana to the wall. It was modern art. And you get to it, and it's like, well, if you have to explain it, you don't get it. And I always go, yep, correct. And I've said for years that beauty is experience. So nobody had to tell me when I walked in the Sistine Chapel that where I was standing was some place that was beautiful. Nobody had to tell me that. I could tell instantly by the way that things were. Standing in front of the Mona Lisa, standing in front of, even natural beauty when you are at the ocean, when you're on the mountains. Beauty is something that is there, but our postmodern world and the rest has made beauty subjective in every sense of the word and taken what I think is a beautiful concept, which is like beauty is in the eye of the beholder. And this is in reference, I think, more to physical beauty in a lot of ways, and distorted it to a point where it's excesses of lasciviousness, unreason, cruelty, and pride. Finally, the desire for novelty is indispensable if we are to produce fashions or vogues. This is a key component. The use of fashions in thought is to distract the attention of men from their real dangers. And you look at theological, philosophical arguments, the highs and lows, and over again of, this is what people are thinking right now. This is what's going on right now with these. And I always go, come back to me 50 years from now and tell me if anybody's still talking about that. And most of the time, 99% of the time, they're not. That was a complete nonsense and the rest. You look at the fashions even within sciences. So this isn't just the arts. Look in the sciences of climate change and climate warnings. And, first it was global warming, and then it was global cooling, and now it's climate change. And the changes of all of those things and all the terminologies is going on over and over again. And it's both fashionable to be in charge of those. And you think about how this works out with miscommunication, misdirection, with all sorts of different misinformation either, that utilizing fashions to distract the attention of men from real dangers. We direct the fashionable outcry of each generation against those vices in which it is least in danger and fix its approval on the virtue nearest to that vice which we are trying to make endemic. So let me just put it this way. It would be quite crazy to save the world from man-made climate change, but lose your soul. And so make a faith in Christianity completely about that. Make it about climate change. Make it about race relations. So much so that it teaches you to hate your brother or hate others based off of their race, their ethnicity. Divide people. Mask, no mask. Find a reason that they find to be virtuous and then distort it. That's what he's getting at. The game is to have them all running about with fire extinguishers whenever there is a flood, and all crowding to the side of the boat, which is already nearly gunwale under. Thus, we make it fashionable to expose the dangers of enthusiasm at the very moment when they are all really becoming worldly and lukewarm. A century later, when we are really making them all Byronic and drunk with emotion, the fashionable outcry is directed against the dangers of the mere understanding. Cruel ages are put on their guard against sentimentality, feckless and idle ones against respectability, lecherous ones against puritanism, and whenever all men are really hastening to be slaves or tyrants, we make liberalism the prime bogey. So this happened this week, so I'll just give you this example. Working along with a group and who just finished a year study through the book of Romans. It was a fantastic study and the rest. And this next year, though, the study is going to be through the book of Genesis. And one of the things that came up as a question that came up from an individual was, why in the world are we doing Genesis when we should be doing something from the New Testament? And, I said, we just spent a whole year studying the New Testament. And the response was, yeah, but we don't need the Old Testament. And I went, I would disagree with that. I think there's a lot that God has given to us that we can learn from those things. And slowly but surely in my conversation, I started figuring out that he was so set on the idea of we're missing the gospel that he was willing to toss out most of the rest of the Bible outside of the four gospels. That he had become so fixated on one particular thing that he missed the forest for the trees. that he was missing the totality of what God might have in store for us all. But the greatest triumph of all is to elevate this horror of the same old thing into a philosophy so that nonsense in the intellect may reinforce corruption in the will. It is here that the general evolutionary or historical character of modern European thought, partly our work, comes in so useful. The enemy loves platitudes. Of a proposed course of action, he wants men, so far as I can see, to ask very simple questions. Is it righteous? Is it prudent? Is it possible? Now, if we can keep men asking, is it in accordance with the general movement of our time? Is it progressive or reactionary? Is this the way that history is going? They will neglect the relevant questions. So, what is the relevant question? Is this holy? Is this righteous? Is what we're doing good? Is this what God intended? But instead, we ask questions, and I'm going to step on some toes here, like this. Did God really mean? Or, we need to restudy that issue. We need to spend some time restudying that issue. And it's amazing to me, and I'll say this, that every time I've heard of a congregation that says that we're going to spend some time restudying something, I automatically know where they're going. I mean, it's been every time. I can't tell you of a single instance where when somebody starts to restudy something, it did not come from a push from culture or a moving away from, is this holy, is this righteous? Does this change how we view the inspiration of Scripture if suddenly we see Scripture as, Scripture, most of it is holy and inspired, but some of it, it's a little bit sexist, a little bit, it has some issues that we need to address and so forth. Paul didn't really mean what he said. It wasn't really inspired and so forth. And it's fascinating to me how often that happens. And so often I can point back to this very chapter and look at it and go, we stopped asking the right question, and instead we started asking, I wonder how history is going to show us, or what this is. Is this really a progressive issue, or is this more about women's rights, or is this more about, how to reach the next generation, if that's the key component? And the questions they do ask are, of course, unanswerable. For they do not know the future, and what the future will be depends very largely on just those choices which they now invoke the future to help them to make. As a result, while their minds are buzzing in this vacuum, we have the better chance to slip in and bend them to the action we have decided on. And great work has already been done. Once they knew that some changes were for the better, and others for the worse, and others again indifferent. We have largely removed this knowledge. For the descriptive adjective unchanged, we have substituted the emotional adjective stagnant. Or in this case, I hear it all the time from a lot of well-meaning brothers who will say things like, well, that's a conservative church. We're a more progressive church. And I always kind of laugh at labels because none of us likes the labels in general, but I have learned that they do mean something typically. And in this case, one of the things that I've said, anytime somebody references me as conservative in some form, I always laugh because what they're really saying is what they're implying is they're unwilling to change. That's the premise. And it's never meant as a positive. It's always meant as a negative. And they think that people won't see through it. In the same light, I believe a lot of people have used the terminology as progressive or liberal and the rest, and meant that also in a way that means, well, they're open to whatever and changing whatever. And at times, that has meant very little. It's just been truly secondary matters. I think there was a time where using PowerPoint was, considered a liberal thing. And so there are moments where we have misused those terminologies the other way too, so don't miss that. We have trained them to think of the future as a promised land which favored heroes attain, not as something which everyone reaches at the rate of 60 minutes an hour, whatever he does, whoever he is. I love that final thing. We have trained them to think of the future as a promised land which favored heroes attain, not as something which everyone reaches at the rate of 60 minutes an hour, whatever he does, whoever he is. Your affectionate uncle, Screwtape. Letter 26. Are you ready? Let's finish out this beautiful evening. My dear Wormwood, yes, courtship is the time for sowing those seeds which will grow up 10 years later into domestic hatred. The enchantment of unsatisfied desire produces results which the humans can be made to mistake for the results of charity. Avail yourself of the ambiguity in the word love. Let them think that they have solved by love problems they have in fact only waived or postponed under the influence of the enchantment. While it lasts, you have your chance to foment the problems in secret and render them chronic. I've been married 16 years, almost 17 years, and I understand this. And as I've gotten older, and I know my wife has too, we are far more understanding of each other because we know each other better after all these years. And learning to not hold on to the record of wrongs or expectations of someone to react in a certain way can absolutely change who you are and change how you view people. And so it's important to not do what they're saying here, because otherwise it can really does foment within a person, and it causes a hatred and an anger to rise up. Or, well, I just know you're always going to react this way, or I know you're going to do this, and that's always problematic. The grand problem is that of unselfishness. Now, you're going to love this. This is a fantastic, and I'll be honest with you, I hadn't thought about this until I read this. The last time I thought about it was the first time I read this, and I sat back and I went, man, I forgot how fantastic that is. Note once again the admirable work of our philological arm in substituting the negative unselfishness for the enemy's positive charity. So here he's saying that the actual premise that God wants us is to have charity for one another, not unselfishness. Thanks to this, you can, from the very outset, teach a man to surrender benefits, not that others may be happy in having them, but that he may be unselfish in foregoing them. See, he's being the one that's being good by being unselfish, instead of being happy to give them over. That is a great point gained. Another great help where the parties concerned are male and female is the divergence of view about unselfishness, which we have built up between the sexes. A woman means by unselfishness chiefly taking troubles for others, going out of their way, serving people. In fact, I would say my wife is very much in this realm. A man means not giving trouble to others. I've done good because I got out of his way, or I got out of their way. I didn't cause problems. As a result, a woman who is quite far gone in the enemy's service will make a nuisance of herself on a larger scale than any man except those whom our Father has dominated completely. And conversely, a man will live long in the enemy's camp before he undertakes as much spontaneous work to please others as a quite ordinary woman may do every day. Thus, while the woman thinks of doing good offices and the man of respecting other people's rights, each sex, without any obvious unreason, can and does regard the other as radically selfish. This is where understanding the differences between men and women is so paramount. It's so important to understand this. That sometimes I used this example once before, but when two men can get together and hang out together and probably say a total of 5 words in 4 or 5 hours, and their wives will look at them and go, "What'd y'all do?" Like, "Well, we hung out. It was fun. It's great. It's normal." And in fact, it was truly a wonderful thing because of just the silence and the enjoyment of just being in company and the rest, and there was no expectation beyond that. The opposite could be true at times with others when they gather together. With women who gather together, they're more known. I don't say this always. I would never use the always and for men and women, but they're more known for spending time and actually discussing and talking and sharing and the rest. And they'll come back, and men will look at that and go, "What in the world was that? Why is that good?" Well, they needed that. Well, they'll feel like they need it. And each individual of us is a little bit different in what our needs actually are. But there are moments where we might look at the other and go, "Well, they're just being selfish because they're not providing me what I need," specifically because men are different than women and women are different than men. Women don't necessarily see the things men do or desire, and women don't see the things that men do or desire. It's the balance of it all. And he's highlighting how to use this specific notion to cause a rift. On top of these confusions, you can now introduce a few more. The erotic enchantment produces a mutual complacence in which each is really pleased to give in to the wishes of the other. They also know that the enemy demands of them a degree of charity, which, if attained, would result in similar actions. You must make them selfish as a law for their whole married life, that degree of mutual self-sacrifice which is at present sprouting naturally out of the enchantment, but which, when the enchantment dies away, they will not have charity enough to enable them to perform. They will not see the trap, since they are under the double blindness of mistaking sexual excitement for charity and of thinking that the excitement will last. So I can note this. The last couple of days, my wife and I have been, as I noted earlier, moving. And in the moving, lifting things, moving things, and the rest, it's been a lot, and both my wife and I have spent a lot of time just trying to like survive. It feels like in some ways, but over and over again, I'm just amazed at how her spirit with the kids and taking care of the kids, thinking about others along the way. And the one thing that I think it's important that we don't fall into, but I know a long time ago I would have fallen into, is well, she's not done as much as I have when it comes to heavy lifting. I lifted a lot of the bigger stuff. She didn't lift all the other stuff. I took care of all this stuff where she didn't do that. And she, on the other hand, could be sitting back and going, well, he's not helping with the kids or not doing with this and so forth. And we fall into this idea that times that we're keeping scores, where we're constantly, where there's this measure we're playing, where this game we're playing, where we're balancing out like, well, I've done more than she has, or she's done more than I have, or she feels like I owe her something and so forth. And the danger of that, especially since you're misusing your service to build up. So if I was like, well, I'm going to lift all this stuff so that when I go take a break, she can't say anything. That's just so problematic. And I am so unbelievably grateful that I don't have a wife that is in that realm, and that I don't have a family and my children and the rest that are in that realm. In fact, I was looking back when we moved to Ohio 2 years ago. And my brother drove a truck up from Texas all the way up here and then flew back because he wanted to help, and it was just so fantastic. But I never once thought of it as, well, my brother's trying to get one over on me, or my brother's trying to make me the where I owe him something. And it's so peaceful to not have that constant battle that so many find themselves in their marriages, where they spend their marriages holding on to, you did do this or you did do that, I did this, and I always do this stuff from this. In fact, one of the greatest lessons I think I've learned in marriage through the years is to forget the words never and always, or you never do this, or I always do that, and so forth, and realize that that's never the case, that it's always wrong. And those are the only times that you could utilize those terminologies. When once a sort of official, legal, or nominal unselfishness has been established as a rule for the keeping of which their emotional resources have died away and their spiritual resources have not yet grown, the most delightful results follow. In discussing any joint action, it becomes obligatory that A should argue in favor of B's supposed wish and against his own, while B does the opposite. It is often impossible to find out either party's real wishes. With luck, they end up doing something that neither wants, while each feels a glow of self-righteousness and harbors a secret claim to preferential treatment for the unselfishness shown and a secret grudge against the other for the ease with which the sacrifice has been accepted. Later on, you can venture on what might be called the generous conflict illusion. This game is best played with more than two players, in a family with grown-up children, for example. Something quite trivial, like having tea in the garden, is proposed. One member takes care to make it quite clear, though not in so many words, that he would rather not, but is of course prepared to do so out of unselfishness. The others instantly withdraw their proposal, ostensibly through their unselfishness, but really because they don't want to be used as any sort of lay figure in which the first speaker practices petty altruisms. But he is not going to be done out of his debauch of unselfishly either. He insists on doing what the others want. They insist on doing what he wants. Passions are roused. Soon someone is saying, very well, then I won't have tea at all. And a real quarrel ensues with bitter resentment on both sides. You see how it is done? If each side has been frankly contending for his own real wish, they would have all kept within the bounds of reason and courtesy. But just because the contention is reversed and each side is fighting the other side's battle, all the bitterness which really flows from thwarted self-righteousness and obstinacy and the accumulated grudges of the last 10 years is concealed from them by the nominal or official unselfishness of which they are doing, at least, held to be excused by it. Each side is, indeed, quite alive to the cheap quality of the adversary's unselfishness and of the false position into which he is trying to force them. But each manages to feel blameless and ill-used itself, with no more dishonesty than comes natural to a human. This is such a key component. This goes back to is where you feel victimized because you are going out of your way to serve people, and they don't understand why. In fact, I cannot tell you how many people I've worked with through the years who just be like, nobody appreciates all the things that I'm doing. And I've had to remind them, number one, that's often life. Number two, I question your motives in doing what you were doing if you were seeking others' approval. If you were always seeking what others would do for you in response to what you were doing. If you're a giving person purely because you want something given back to you, and I understand that in some premises, but when it comes to seeking God, when God says, do unto others as you would have them do unto you, it's not for your selfish gain. It's because it is what is right. You do it because it is what is holy and what is righteous. It's not because of what you can gain back. You do it in spite of what others might do to you, that you love them and you care for them and you provide for them. But we've gotten this kind of reverse where we think we do everything, and if we don't get something in return, then something has gone wrong. A sensible human once said, if people knew how much ill feeling unselfishness occasions, it would not be so often recommended from the pulpit. And again, she's the sort of woman who lives for others. You can always tell the others by their hunted expressions. Okay, that's a fascinating little note there. All this can be begun even in the period of courtship. A little real selfishness on your patient's part is often of less value in the long run for securing his soul than the first beginnings of that elaborate and self-consciousness, unselfishness which may one day blossom into the sort of thing I have described. Some degree of mutual falseness, some surprise that the girl does not always notice just how unselfish he's being, can be smuggled in already. Cherish these things, and above all, don't let the young fools notice them. If they notice them, they will be on the road to discovering that love is not enough, that charity is needed and not yet achieved, and that no external law can supply its place. Boy, has this been a tough lesson at times to learn through the years. That love is a choice and that love is a decision. That love is not just the emotion. In fact, love is in spite of how you feel, in spite of the emotions, that you stay true to your word, that you continue on. And I'll say, it's not that the emotions come and go. I don't believe that. In fact, my emotions for, say, my wife have changed through the years. They have grown not just stronger, but different. And I never expected them to be that way, but that's the way that they are today. And that love, at times, the emotion, the feel, is not always enough. That's why charity, grace, mercy also become part of what love must be in a marriage, in a relationship, with my children, with my friends, my coworkers, the church family, and others that I'm around. I wish Slum Trimpet could do something about undermining that young woman's sense of the ridiculous. Your affectionate uncle, Screwtape. So he closes out this letter, and that brings us to the end. We are down to our last 2 weeks plus the closing book. So I think we have about 3 weeks left in total. Thank you so much for joining me tonight. It, as always, has been a pleasure to be with you. Next week, we are in letters 27, 28, and 29. I look forward to being back with you. I look forward to going on there and seeing all the notes where you guys are at, where you're coming from. I love you all. As always, reach out if I can help you in any way. Look forward to seeing you all next week. Have a wonderful, wonderful week. We'll see you then.